Good afternoon, and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Portland's Forum on the Oregon State Budget and the Oregon Ballot Measures that would affect it. I'm Debbie Kay, representing the League of Women Voters, and I'm the moderator for the day. Our co-sponsors today are the American Association of University Women, AAUW, Portland Branch, and the YWCA of Greater Portland. Thank you so much for being here with us today. These three organizations have related purposes. The mission of AAUW is advancing equity for women and girls through advocacy, education, philanthropy, and research. The mission of the YWCA is to eliminate racism, empower women, and to promote peace, justice, dignity, and freedom for all. And the League of Women Voters' mission is to promote political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. Three great organizations. Again, so glad you're here with us today. The League of Women Voters works to help voters make informed choices in elections. This also conforms with the missions of the other organizations, and the goal of this forum is to give you, the voters, the information that will help you cast your vote on ballot measures on November 8th, or at least by November 8th. Our guests today for our forum are Brian DeForest, Deputy Chief Financial Officer at the Oregon Department of Administrative Services. He will begin the program by explaining the general fund and the lottery fund of the state budget. After his presentation, Beth Burzak, former president of the League of Women Voters of Oregon, will join us here to present factual information about Ballot Measures 96, which is Services for Veterans, 98, High School Success and Dropout Prevention, and Measure 99, Outdoor School. The passage of any of these measures would have an impact on the state budget. Oregon State Senator Michael Dembrow and Oregon Business Association President Ryan Deckard will conclude the forum with a debate on Measure 97 and its potential effects on the Oregon budget, Oregon's economy, and state services. Ryan Deckard will be coming. Audience questions for speakers may be written on 3x5 index cards. We have volunteers who will be passing those out, so raise your hand if you want one. Please write legibly because I get to read them, and return it to a league member who will pass it up here. We will save questions until the end. We'll begin the forum with background information on how we fund government services in Oregon. Brian DeForest will explain the fundamentals of Oregon's state government budget, including how much funding from the general fund and the lottery fund are dedicated to specific purposes, and how the budget could change by passage of measures on the general election ballot. Once again, Brian DeForest is the Deputy Chief Financial Officer at the Oregon Department of Administrative Services, headquartered in Salem. His responsibilities include drafting the governor's budget based on the most recent revenue and spending forecasts. Previously, he served as statewide audit and budget reporting manager. He has also served in multiple agencies with the state government, generally as budget officer or budget manager. Are you hearing that word? Budget. And analyst as well. Brian, thank you for joining us. You have about 20 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Just as a bit of background, I've been in Oregon state government now for just over 25 years, 5 more years, and I'll be PERS eligible, thank goodness. And I am still continually learning about budgeting in state government. It is one of the most complex organizations that I've been exposed to. Prior to my state service, I worked at First Interstate Bank, and let me tell you, it's a whole lot easier in the private sector. I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Let's see if this works. And then we'll get right into the heart of the budget itself, the general and lottery funds. This gives you a brief timeline of budget development that we're working through. Most of the state agencies have been budgeting now since February. They've all submitted their agency request budgets, so they've made their requests to the governor. Thank goodness their requests only put us in about a $3.5 billion hole. And not all of them will certainly be funded, but they'll be under consideration for the governor. We're in this big purple area right now where the governor is reading through the budgets, or her staff is reading through budgets and taking considerations on what should the next steps be, whether they be reductions or enhancements to that budget. On December 1st, the sitting governor would be statutorily required to submit the budget to the legislature. Should there be a change in governorship, then that deadline pushes out to February 1st. We take a look at several different trends in state government as we're budgeting. One of the most important things that we need to look at is some of the aging demographics that we have going on. This is the most important of all of our demographic slides when it comes to age. And you'll notice that the top red line slopes upward quite significantly. That would be the baby boomer generation, beginning back in 2005 and on, as they begin moving into the retirement years. These are individuals that are beginning to draw their assets out of savings and put them into longer-term care for the remainder of their life. The yellow line is the one that we're paying particular attention to right now. This cohort is between 75 and 84 years old. You can see that they begin accumulating as we go into the out years. Individuals between these ages begin to develop much more significant and acute healthcare issues. And this becomes a concern, and as you can see, that slopes up in the out years. This is something that we in budget are keeping an eye on to be prepared for, not just in 17-19, but 19-21 and beyond. And then the lower line would be 85 plus. These are individuals that tend to have already exhausted all of their resources and become a heavier load on our Medicaid programs. Economically, Oregon is recovering from the Great Recession. We stumbled for a little while, or at least down in my part of the state, it sure felt like it. The Portland area has come back and is becoming much more robust. The I-5 corridor seems to have rebounded and is now above pre-recession status. But the outlying areas of Oregon continue to lag behind, causing some budgetary concerns out in those areas, the outlying areas of the state, especially as we look at unemployment numbers from the eastern and southern portions of the state. I have a feeling I'm skipping over several slides at a time. Could I grab that portable mic? Is that possible?
Yours.
Oh, this mic.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm much better on the fly anyway. I'm much better on the fly anyway. I'm kind of dangerous when I have a microphone in my hand.
You may not be on screen, however.
I'll come back up there. As we look at the state budget, I'm going to first show you the 15-17 biennium. As we look to the left, these are the resources that are available to the state. You can see that we spend from 4 different categories: general and lottery fund in the lower right-hand quadrant. Federal funds, these are our entitlement programs and matching funds that come to us from the federal government. And then other funds off to the left. These will tend to be the licensing fees. If you're a hunter or a fisher person, or if you drive a car, you pay an other fund fee in order to exercise those privileges. On the right-hand side is the exact same dollars in total, but it's the expenditure side of the ledger. The largest single area of expenditures is over in human services, and this is in total funds characterization. So if you took some of their general fund, added the federal funds to it, you can see that we spend $31 billion for human services. This is our mental health care, senior services, and so on. For general and lottery funds, and this is where it really gets interesting, because this is the big debate, and I apologize, the percentages did not show up on this PowerPoint. They worked just fine this morning, but did not convert very well up here. I do kind of know what they are, though, sort of. Again, 25 years in budget, I'm still learning. Personal income tax represents 81% of our general fund, lottery fund combined revenue. Lottery makes up only 5% of our revenue. And then you can see the other things off to the side, whether it's cigarette tax, estate tax, and corporate income. We are very heavily reliant on the personal income tax. So when we went through the Great Recession, we suffered greatly compared to other states who have a different balance with their sales tax. Conversely, we're much stronger than our sales tax neighbors at the current time because our personal income tax is much more robust at the present time. Other states that are heavily reliant on fuels, such as Texas, North Dakota, and Alaska, they're actually reporting deficits even as we speak. Off to the right is our expenditures for both general and lottery fund. In the current biennium, it's about $19 billion. To the far left, you can see it's labeled there state school fund. Down just below that in a light blue, that would be all other education. Both of those categories add up to 52%. So 52% of your personal income tax dollars, the general fund and lottery fund combined, go toward education programs. The state school fund is simply a transfer out to 197 school districts from the state of Oregon. That just represents the state's portion of funding school districts. School districts also have local income tax, or property tax, excuse me, local property tax to augment that. In the lighter blue is where we community colleges and rest of the university system. On the right-hand side, you can see human services. When it comes to percentage of general and lottery fund, it's a much smaller percentage than compared to total funds, and then public safety and all others off to the side. I will make these available in a PDF format. I will give that to Margaret, and she can distribute it out so you can see with much better detail than what I provided here. The importance of this slide gives a historical context on how general fund has been spent. The top left is overall expenditures back in 89-91. I came on board July 1st, 1991, the first biennium that had to deal with Ballot Measure 5, which was a property income tax measure. Back in the old days, 25% of the general fund was dedicated to the state school fund. Today, in 15-17, 39% is dedicated to state school fund. The state of Oregon is the resource of last resort for local school districts. That is to say, the amount necessary to fund the schools is established. Local property taxes fund what it can, and the remainder becomes the obligation of the state. Ultimately, the legislature decides what that final dollar amount is, but the state is the funder of last resort. So with state school fund going from 25% to 39%, higher education going down only 1% from 11 to 10, and human services actually growing by 3%. Public safety grew just slightly. All other education shrank. This is the administrative portion of state government. It's also a lot of the fee-based agencies, primarily natural resources. There was also some squeezing of higher education in there as well. So that gives you some historical context about general fund. This is a series of slides, and I'll come through these very, very quickly. This is a time lapse of what the poverty rate in Oregon has looked like over the last 16 years. Starting with 1999, you can see Oregon overall poverty rate of 11.6. The scale does not change on any of these slides. Red indicates highest poverty level rates category. Yellow would be the least poverty rate, lowest poverty rate, and then green's in between. My friends at Economic Analysis like to change the scale, but it doesn't do much until you begin to see over time, up through 2008 when we hit the Great Recession, 2009, 10, and now 14. We're seeing some slight recovery in Clackamas. The scale is less than 10%. Clackamas comes in at a whopping 9.9, so they barely made it into yellow. But this is one of the most stark time series that I've seen in government in my tenure here. This affects Department of Human Services, Employment Department, Housing and Community Services as well. The good news, budgetary reserves. In 2009-11, you can see we drew down as many reserves as we could to get by as well as we could. Programs in state government, including our funding of the state school fund, actually retracted. We had a budget that was lower than the prior biennium. Since that time, we have been able to grow both our rainy day fund in blue and our education stability fund in yellow. As we approach the end of the current biennium, we will get up towards $1 billion in reserves. If we are able to keep those reserves in place and get through the end of next biennium, it'll grow to $1.2 billion. And you can see the percentages of expenditures that they would otherwise cover should we have another economic downturn. Good news about reserves is there are very specific triggers in place that prevent those funds from being spent unless, and I don't remember the specifics around them, the economy retracts. We have so many negative forecasts in a row, and as well as increasing unemployment rates. This slide will give you an idea of growth in state government by program area. Each program area has 3 bars. The first bar was the budget that was adopted come July 1st of 2015. The slide is the budget that the program area is operating under today. So all of our education agencies saw a slight bump up, same with our human resource agencies, and same with our public safety. The third slide in each of those categories is what we call the current service level budget that we anticipate going into next biennium with. So what do I mean by that? Because I'm a bureaucrat and I like using bureaucratic language. Current service level is defined in Oregon Revised Statute. And in a nutshell, what it means is whatever level of services we're providing today, at the end of this biennium, we'll continue that level of service into next biennium. And we quantify the cost. It doesn't matter if we're funding at 100% need or if we're only meeting 20% of the need. We anticipate under law to fund it at the same level. Does that mean that all of the agencies can anticipate that this would be their approved budget? No, not at all. If we're in a cut mode, we have to cut. If we're in a growth mode, then we tend to grow into it. But what this means is it allows us to see what does the measuring stick for next biennium look like if we simply want to maintain the level of service that we provide today. You can see that the state school fund, which is a black line there under the education, slopes up a bit. That's about an 8% growth. It's a very natural growth for the state school fund to have. Education overall is also coming in about the 8% level, but human services jumps up. They're increasing at about a 25% level. I'll get into a little bit more of the details on what's driving that, but the federal government was very good about participating in a lot of healthcare programs in the current biennium. They're going to take back some of that help in a future biennium under agreement that the state of Oregon has with the feds. Public safety also growing at about 8% as well. So what's causing the budget to grow? If we look at the legislatively approved budget, and then right next to it show what the current service level would look like, again, providing the exact same services at the exact same level of service. That is, if it's crummy now, it's going to stay crummy. If it's fantastic, it's going to stay fantastic. We see that we're growing in our current service level by about 14.4% for a total current service level of about $21.8 billion. I remember when $10 billion was real money. The different areas that are growing or the drivers that are causing it. Inflation at about $1 billion, well, $1.1 billion. A lot of that is the K-12 system itself. Again, we just write a check. We write 197 checks, but we write those once every year, and they go out the door. So the inflation that's really pressing on the school districts, there's PERS, there's rising wages. About 80% of the cost of school districts is really in the personnel. We have different phase-ins over here on the right side in the pink. Programs that are started midway through the biennium have to grow and become full programs for the next biennium. So, for instance, if we funded a program for 6 months in 2015-17, we quadruple that in order to get 24 months worth of service. Not increasing the amount of people that we serve necessarily, but increasing just for the lapse of time. Debt service is increasing by $176 million. This still keeps us underneath 5% of our general fund paying off our debt. Position adjustments, $210 million, anticipating wage growth in the new biennium. And then the big elephant in the room is the orange one in the upper left-hand quadrant, replacing one-time funds. This is a bit of a tricky one, and here comes the bureaucrat. That number really should be almost $900 million. Most of that is in the Oregon Health Authority, and that's replacing one-time funds either from the federal government or from reserves that they had internal to the agency. That agency alone is close to $900 million of replacing one-time funds. The difference and why it comes back down to 547 is local property tax. Remember I had said that the state is the funder of last resort for school districts. Local property tax has increased at a rate faster than the expenditures increased. And the local property tax has increased over $300 million faster. And so the state actually sees some relief in that. So while 1.1 billion is while the 14.4% growth is astounding, it's not out of the ordinary when it comes to government expenditure growth. Some of that is PERS, but again, we got some relief from the local property tax. And the same would be true for community colleges as well. Again, 8% growth in state school fund, other education, 9% growth in public safety. Natural resources is only at 3%. All other is at 26%. That's a slight misnomer in that we have to replenish the emergency fund, so it goes from 0 to $30 million. The effects of ballot measures that have to be under consideration because the governor does have to take into account the results of the November 8th elections. Ballot measure 96 would increase lottery fund expenditures by $18.7 million. Measure 98 would be $294 million increase. And ballot measure 99, that should not read 22 million, it should be 44 million. 22 is the annual amount. This is an increase in lottery fund expenditures, but there is no offsetting increase in lottery fund revenues. So we will have to make up the difference somewhere else. I'll show this is the last slide. I do have more, again, I will get copies out to you. In terms of general and lottery funds, I apologize, this is very, very small print, but this is the number of agencies that we have in state government that use general and lottery funds. If we look at 90% of the current service level budget, it's in those top 7 or 8 agencies. Those agencies are the state school fund, which is the size of the next 2 combined, Department of Human Services, Oregon Health Authority, HEC, which is the Higher Education Coordination Committee, which takes care of community colleges and the universities, is next. Department of Corrections coming in at $1.7 billion. Department of Education underneath that with a lot of grant and aid, and then the Judicial Department. The point of this slide is this. If we look at the current service level deficit that we're forecasting right now, it's about 5.7, or excuse me, did I say 5.7? I probably lied. How's that for a bureaucrat? 6.5% deficit. If we add in the 3 ballot measures that would dedicate lottery funds or other general fund, the deficit would grow to $1.7 billion, or 8.3%. If we also have a downturn in our economic forecast, which is plausible but not probable, and that swing was $500 million, which is small compared to what the recession would be, our deficit would become 10.7%. In order to hold anything harmless above that dotted line, we'd have to wipe out general and lottery funding for all of the other agencies combined, and yet we'd still be a bit short. That would mean no legislature, no governor, no my department, no a lot of things. And finally, and we illustrated this for the governor, this is how we spend our money in terms of categories. For the general lottery fund, again, projecting $21.5 billion service level. Special payments out the door represent 72% of that. That's all of the payments out to the state school fund, community colleges, the universities. It's also a lot of transfer payments through Oregon Health Authority, Department of Human Services, and so on. A lot of mental health going to the counties and the cities and whatnot. Our debt service, dedicated funds to pay off debt, of which we provide full faith and credit, or full faith and commitment to all of our lenders. We come down to some services and supplies, which is about 24% of that total. If we cut 10% of the administration that's left in that wedge, that's 0.5%. We went through this exercise in 2009. There is, just with any, like with any organization, there is fat. And I totally get that. My job is to find that. Agency director's job is to hide it. I'm afraid all we could get is probably 1/2 of 1%. So the bottom line on that is we're looking at the real possibility of having to make some deep cuts. 2 to 3%, piece of cake. That's what we get paid to do. 3 to 5%, people lose jobs, and that hurts. Anything above 5%, limbs are beginning to come off. At least that's the feeling. I have 8 positions in my office on that slate right now. These are very real reductions. We did it in 2008, and if we need to do it again, then we will. There's the background on the Oregon State budget. I will stick around. I'm looking forward to the debate, and I will be around for any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. I wish you could sit next to everyone in the state and explain what you've shared with us today. And I know there's a great deal more to try to understand. Next, we will have an explanation of the 3 measures on your ballot that would require money from the state budget to be used for funding specific services. We will hope to have some time for questions on these 3 ballot measures at the conclusion of the entire program. Beth Burzak, former State League president, will explain these measures. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes. Okay. As Debbie mentioned, and Brian, thank you for the colorful pie charts. You will understand the sections of the state budget that I will be talking about, so thank you. There are 3 state ballot measures that propose to dedicate funding from current revenue sources in the state budget to fund specific programs. Ballot measures 96 and 99 would take revenue from the lottery fund. Measure 98 would take money from the general fund. Measure 96 is a constitutional amendment referred to voters by the 2016 Oregon legislature with unanimous votes, both in the House and the Senate. If this measure passes, it would amend the Oregon Constitution to dedicate 1.5% of the net revenue from the state lottery to the fund services for Oregon veterans. There are more than 300,000 veterans in Oregon, about 1 of every 12 Oregonians. Veterans may have physical and mental problems related to their service. They are more likely to be homeless and twice as likely to die from suicide. Although 3 out of 10 veterans do access their benefits, others need help to use services for which they are eligible. The 2015 Oregon legislature allocated $13 million from the general fund budget to finance services for veterans. 74 veteran service officers serve Oregon counties, tribes, and college or university campuses to help Oregon veterans connect with these services and benefits that they have earned. In 2014, federal benefit payments to Oregon veterans and the agencies that serve them are estimated to have brought more than $2.5 billion to Oregon. Measure 96 would require that 1.5% of the net proceeds of the lottery be deposited in a newly created Veteran Services Fund. This 1.5% of net revenue would be more than $18 million over 2 years. This money would be dedicated to funding services for veterans, including assistance with reintegration, education, employment, housing, health care, and addiction treatment, as well as to assist veterans and their spouses and dependents for accessing federal and state veteran services, and to providing funding for county, campuses, tribal veteran service offices. Measure 96 would increase the amount of constitutionally dedicated lottery revenue to 34.5%. The dedicated funds for veteran services would not change the amount of revenue constitutionally dedicated for other purposes, but it would reduce the unrestricted lottery funds that the legislature can use for education and economic development. If Measure 96 fails, lottery funding for veteran services would not be constitutionally required, but the legislature could still fund veterans' services from unrestricted lottery funds or from the general fund. The supporters say that this lottery funding will help more veterans get educational, health, and employment benefits, especially when they are reintegrating into society after their service to our country. Oregon veterans have earned their benefits through service to our country and should have more help accessing the benefits they deserve. This measure would benefit Oregon's economy. According to veterans groups, every dollar invested in veteran services and outreach at the state level brings $77 from federal programs into Oregon. The opponents say that we should not clutter our Constitution with funding measure. The legislature should determine when and how much funding is needed for current purposes. Permanently dedicating revenue from the lottery through an amendment to the Constitution could reduce the funding available to support other state programs. And that the prospect of bringing more federal dollars into Oregon should give the legislature ample reason to fund veteran services without going through the Constitution. The next measure is Measure 98, which is the High School Graduation and College and Career Readiness Act. It would amend Oregon law, but not our Constitution. It was placed on the ballot through an initiative petition. If this measure passes, the legislature would be expected to commit an additional $147 million per year to fund career and technical programs, college-level education, and dropout prevention programs. Here's some background information on this measure. Currently, the legislature provides general fund revenues to the state school fund based on constitutionally required quality goals. Funds are distributed directly to school districts under a specified formula. In the current biennium, over half of Oregon's general fund and lottery funds were budgeted for education. Oregon's dropout rate is the 4th worst in the nation. Per pupil spending has dropped 5% since 2010 and ranks near the middle of the 50 states. Access to career technical education, or CTE, such as auto shop, wood and metal shop, culinary arts, and robotics, has been significantly reduced over the last 20 years. Data from the Oregon Department of Education shows that the four-year graduation rate for students who have earned at least one CTE credit is 15.5 percentage points higher for graduation than the statewide average. The difference tends to be more dramatic for low-income and minority students who have taken CTE courses. Ballot Measure 98 establishes a new high school graduation and college and career readiness fund in the general fund. The measure directs the legislature to appropriate to this fund and to the Department of Education at least $800 per enrolled high school student per year. This money is to be used for three specific purposes. The first is to establish or expand career and technical education programs in the high schools. The second is to establish or expand college-level educational opportunities for students in high schools. And the third is to establish or expand dropout prevention programs for high schools. School districts are free to choose whether to apply for these additional funds. In order to receive these funds, school districts must submit grant proposals to the Department of Education showing how the funds would be used for either of these three programs. If a district's grant application does not qualify, the Department of Education would assist the district in preparing a qualified plan. The measure requires that the funds to be used for these three college and career readiness and dropout prevention programs must be in addition to the total amount that the legislature would otherwise make available for funding other kindergarten through 12 public education. However, the measure creates no new funding, no new revenue sources, and relies initially on growth of the state general fund revenue. If the state general fund does not increase by at least $1.5 billion in the next two-year budget period, initial funding for the measure would be reduced and phased in over 4 years. The Department of Education will monitor districts receiving the funds, and the Secretary of State will conduct audits on the programs. Supporters say that Measure 98 would expand and create new vocational and technical career education, as well as college-level courses in high schools, and students will have more educational opportunities. Measure 98 supports dropout prevention, such as guidance counselors and tutors, to keep students on track. And Measure 98 funding amounts to 1.4% of the upcoming state budget, well within the range of feasibility and similar to the size of investment in full-day kindergarten. Opponents say there is no new source of revenue for these programs mandated to be funded from the state general fund, thus reducing allocations for other essential services such as public safety, social services, and educational expenses. Budgeting for the three areas could be budgeted within K through 12 funding, not outside of the budget process. And finally, that the measure would reduce funding for other essential services such as public safety and economic development. And the third measure that I will describe today is Measure 99. It would create an outdoor school education fund to make outdoor school programs available to all Oregon students statewide. Like Measure 98, Measure 99 would amend Oregon laws, but not the Constitution. It was placed on the ballot with a citizen initiative petition. Outdoor school programs began in Oregon more than 50 years ago. Currently, all but 4 Oregon counties have some outdoor school programs, but 20 counties have fewer than 40% of their students participating, and many provide only a 2-night program rather than a full week. These programs are funded primarily through a combination of donations, fees, grants from foundations, and support from school districts, education service districts, and local governments. In 2015, the Oregon legislature passed a bill establishing an Oregon education account to support Oregon outdoor school programs for 5th or 6th grade students throughout the state. However, although the original bill included $44 million from the Oregon General Fund to fund these programs, this funding was omitted from the final bill. Ballot Measure 99 proposes to provide funding to give all Oregon 5th or 6th grade students the opportunity to participate in environmental education through field study or of natural sciences and responsible use of natural resources. The measure does not mandate Oregon outdoor education in all schools, but the goal is to make a week-long outdoor school or similar hands-on science experience in the outdoors accessible for all students throughout the state. The measure creates a separate outdoor school education fund that is financed by net revenues from the Oregon State Lottery. The measure requires that the lesser of 4% of the net lottery revenues, or $5.5 million, must be deposited every 3 months into the outdoor school fund. The total dollar amount would be limited to $22 million per year or up to $44 million per year, per biennium. This figure will be adjusted annually based on the Consumer Price Index. Grants for outdoor school programs would be awarded by the Oregon State University Extension Service, which would also provide assistance in program leadership. Allocations to the fund could not reduce lottery proceeds dedicated under the Oregon Constitution to education, state parks, and wildlife, but could reduce the amounts of lottery funding that now go on to other education or economic development programs. However, because this is not a constitutional dedication, the legislature would have some flexibility to decide whether to fully fund it if legislators believe that other education or economic development programs should have a priority. The supporters say outdoor education provides hands-on learning that students just can't get inside the classroom. Research shows that these programs build life skills such as self-confidence, leadership, teamwork, and collaboration, and sparks an interest in science and math and improves school attendance and academic performance. Measure 99 creates a stable, dedicated funding source for outdoor school without raising taxes. Currently, about half of Oregon students don't have the opportunity to attend outdoor school, primarily because their schools do not have enough funding to participate. And dedicated funding for outdoor school would benefit Oregon's economy by creating hundreds of full-time jobs in rural Oregon. Opponents say that dedicating these lottery funds to outdoor school could reduce the funding for economic development programs that create jobs statewide, including rural Oregon, and dedicating lottery funding to outdoor school programs might reduce the lottery funding available for other school needs, such as maintenance. The initiative process is not the appropriate way to allocate funding for programs because voters are unlikely to understand all of the trade-offs. And Measure 99 would complicate the legislature's job of balancing the state budget and setting priorities for state expenditure. The legislature should determine how much funding to provide for all the state's current needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks a lot. It's a big deal. All of these are a big deal. That's why we're here today. And the additional reason we're here today is to have a debate on Measure 97. And is Ryan Deckert here? There he is. Measure 97 would change Oregon's tax laws to increase the corporate minimum tax on C corporations that have sales in Oregon of more than $25 million. Did I get that right? That's as succinct as we can get. The minimum tax would not change for smaller corporations or for S corporations. Measure 97 was placed on the ballot by citizen initiative petition. Our debaters today are Oregon Senator Michael Dembro, who will speak in support of Measure 97, and Ryan Deckert will speak against it. Thank you both very much for being here. A brief introduction. Senator Dembro represents District 23 in Portland. He's the chair of the Senate Workforce Committee and also serves on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, the Human Services and Early Childhood Committee, and the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Natural Resources. Ryan Deckert is president of the Oregon Business Association, OBA. Before joining OBA, he represented Washington County as an Oregon State Representative and a state senator. He chaired the Senate Finance and Revenue Committee for 6 years. Here's a little on process. We'll begin the debate with a 7-minute presentation from each speaker explaining his position on Measure 97. Each presentation will be timed, and I would like to remind our audience to kindly remain quiet. Audience members, if you have a question, please get a 3x5 card and write legibly and hand it back to a league member who will pass it on. We hope to have time at the end for these questions. And timers, please give our speakers a 1-minute warning. We will begin with Senator Dembro speaking in support. 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, League, for inviting me here to explain why I, as a legislator, am supporting Measure 97. Not on.
No, you're on.
Oh.
Is it black? Is it colored?
Yes.
Okay, good. There you are.
Okay. Can I start again?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you again, League, for inviting me to explain why I, as a legislator, am supporting Measure 97. I decided to run for the legislature 9 years ago. I'd been teaching at Portland Community College for more than 25 years, privileged to help thousands of Oregonians onto pathways of success. But my job was getting harder and harder. More and more students were coming unprepared for college. They needed extensive, expensive remediation just to get on track. I could see firsthand the devastating effects that our state's funding crisis, dating back to Measure 5's property tax limitation from the 1990s, were having on our schools. Every year, another career technical program cut, another day taken off the school year, another departing teacher or counselor or librarian not replaced, another classroom with more than 30 students in it, another fee added, another bit of maintenance left undone. It was all adding up to broad pockets of failure. My goal in entering the legislature was to change that, to do all I could to shrink the funding gap and gradually move us closer to full funding of the quality education model over the next few years, get us back to creating success. That didn't happen. My election to the legislature coincided with the beginning of the Great Recession. Instead of reinvesting in schools, we faced a further $4 billion shortfall, and the gap grew wider. Decades of cuts have had long-term consequences. Despite our efforts to prioritize education, we find ourselves, with the revenues we have, no closer to fully funding our schools or keeping up with other states. Oregon ranks just 39th for school funding. We have the 3rd largest class sizes in the country and the nation's 4th lowest graduation rate. It's not just education that's hurting due to our state's inadequate revenues. Services to seniors are dwindling, and seniors find themselves increasingly at risk. 1 out of 10 seniors today is living in poverty, and that number is much higher for women, and particularly for women of color. But we don't have the money we need to adequately fund programs like Project Independence that keep seniors healthy and aging in their homes. It is imperative that we find a way to adequately fund education and other vital services. There have been many attempts in the past to fix our revenue problems in the legislature, at the ballot, by many governors. None has worked. None has worked because none has really addressed a fundamental imbalance that we face here in Oregon. We know that Oregonians are working harder than ever, but are taking home less. Working families on average are making $1,000 to $2,000 less today than they were 10 years ago. Meanwhile, corporate profits are up 170% since 2000. Yet when it comes to paying taxes, corporations are paying less. In 1973, corporations paid 18.5% of all Oregon income taxes. Today, their share has been reduced by nearly 2/3 to 6.7%. The truth is, large corporations have become experts at reducing their tax bills to almost nothing. In 2013, 530 companies paid $0 in Oregon state income taxes. Corporations, in fact, pay less in Oregon than anywhere else in the country. According to Ernst & Young and the Anderson Economic Group, year after year, Oregon has ranked 50th, dead last, in corporate taxes. We cannot afford to have the nation's lowest corporate taxes, not when it means that we can't fund education and other vital services at adequate levels. Clearly, we need a fix, something that asks large and out-of-state corporations to step up as they once did. That's what Measure 97 does. Measure 97 asks the largest corporations doing business in Oregon to step up in a way that they have not for many years. It increases the corporate minimum tax only on the largest C corporations, those with annual Oregon sales above $25 million. The percentage increase is very small, and it only kicks in on sales above $25 million. The vast majority of Oregon businesses will see no tax increase at all. Of the 400,000 active businesses in Oregon, the minimum tax will be increased on less than 1/4% of those businesses. And we know that most of those taxes, 82% at least, will be paid by corporations headquartered out of state. How will the revenues from Measure 97 be used? The measure is quite specific. Section 3 directs the projected revenue raised to fund increases in 3 areas: education, healthcare, and senior services. With the projected $3 billion a year, Measure 97 will allow us to make overdue investments, long overdue investments, hire the 8,000 teachers it would take to bring Oregon's class sizes in line with the national average, restore critical days of instruction to the calendar, bring back the career technical education programs and the arts that benefit so many students, allow schools to get the lead and asbestos out of their buildings. We could make healthcare more affordable for the millions of families that struggle to cover basic treatment. We could double the number of seniors receiving in-home care, securing them the dignity they deserve, keep their housing affordable. We could provide them the protective services that will shield them from abuse and neglect. Passage of this measure will truly be a game changer. The public is with us on this. The Portland City Club and the Citizens Initiative Review Commission closely analyzed the measure, and they've endorsed it. Measure 97 is supported by a growing coalition of local businesses, educators, parents, nurses, and community leaders. I'm proud to be part of this coalition. We are capable of providing Oregonians with the education and services they need. We must choose. Please join me in choosing a far, far better future for Oregon's families. Join me in supporting Measure 97. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ryan Deckert will speak on the other side of Measure 97. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice presentation, Senator Dimbrow. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. It's good to be back with you, and I think you have the well-earned gold star of all civic groups. When you look at an issue, you take a nonpartisan, non-biased look at a measure, and as your chair said, these are really important. As I was listening to Senator Dimbrow, I agreed with him on many, many points in terms of the woes of Oregon. I have 3 children in public schools, 2 in elementary and 1 in middle school. I'm a product of our public education system, our public higher education system. I think it was the reason I ran for office at age 24, was concerned about the funding for higher education in Oregon as our corrections budget continued to grow and double, really at the expense of post-secondary education. What we didn't hear in the 7 minutes, and I'd like to hopefully spend the bulk of the time actually talking about Measure 97, because that is the decision that you have before you, and that is what's on the ballot. If the proponents wanted to raise corporate taxes, there is a means and ways to do that. It's a corporate profits tax. I think you have the initiative before you. It's pretty easy to read. It's 1 page or just over 1 page. And I hold it up because, as Senator Dimbrow was talking, I underlined 6 times, and you don't have to go down to paragraph 3, that this is not a tax on corporate profits. We've done that twice. I did it when I was chair of the Senate Revenue Committee, and we did it, OBA supported one on corporate profits. This is a tax on sales, and you will find sales 7 times before you get to the second paragraph. You obviously will not find profits mentioned at all in this. So that's a very different nature. States derive income in really 3 different ways, as we all know, and I think we got into this a little bit in the prior presentation. Obviously, the income tax, most progressive form of taxation. Oregon's 3rd highest in the nation in terms of our income tax. Almost all states have some form of a property tax. And then the 3rd, which Oregon does not have, is a consumption tax. 45 states obviously have the sales tax. We are one of the 5 that does not. One state has a commercial activity tax, another way at deriving consumption and getting at consumption, which is that large revenue generator, and that is Ohio has a CAT tax. European societies, and folks probably as you travel see, they have a VAT tax, a pretty high value-added tax. It's another form of consumption. It just comes up on your bill. Every restaurant, hotel, you just pay that value-added tax. And then 2 states now have, we would be the 3rd, that have a tax on gross receipts. Far, far lower. Texas and Nevada have far, far lower tax on gross receipts. The reason that this is the largest tax increase in Oregon history, $6.2 billion, so unprecedented, a 30 to 40% revenue increase, is getting at widespread consumption and trying to derive that revenue. And we've tried to find, has there ever been, obviously in Oregon, no, anywhere, a revenue increase in one fell swoop of 30 to 40%, and we can't find one ever in the history of America that you've seen this large of a revenue increase put before voters or legislatively decided in one fell swoop. That's not a reason to vote no. That really isn't, that it's a 6.2 revenue increase. The reason to vote no are really 3. One, how this is going to affect consumers. So we obviously produced a report. There is no economic debate at all. The proponents didn't like our PricewaterhouseCoopers report, so we said, let's just wait. Let's wait for the official nonpartisan Legislative Revenue Office to issue the report, which came in May. We could all rely on that. What that report tells you and spells out in very simple, you could just go to their website terms, is how this is going to affect every Oregon family and jobs in the state of Oregon and economic growth. So for a family of 4 making $48,000, this will cost $612. We have an affordable housing crisis in Oregon. I think you can actually use the word crisis. They don't have $612. For a single mom making $21,000, this is an increase of over $300. She doesn't have it. This is someone checking groceries at Fred Meyer. This is someone that is right on the economic margins, and they are having to choose between milk, food, rent, and childcare. And those families don't have it. This would be a radical, radical departure in the progressive income tax strategy that Oregon's had. We've been a state that largely, we usually rank in the top 3 with New York, Hawaii, California, as states that ask those who are doing the best to pay the greatest share of their income. This is the reason why the proponents commissioned their own economic study through PSU. The Oregonian found out through FOIA, Freedom of Information, that they not only sat on the report for 6 months, but also, in very unpolite terms, asked the author of the report, Dr. Tom Patowski, former state economist for the state, to sit and, quote, don't talk to the press, and I will leave out what came before don't. Because Tom did what every other economist talked about and said appropriately, this is a sales tax on steroids. The governor just recently said on OPB, Oregonians aren't stupid. Of course they know they're going to pay this. And so the whole idea that this is going to be a tax that $6.2 billion tax that is just going to descend on the state of Oregon is, well, we'll just defer not just to the nonpartisan legislature's economists, but also their own economist. My eyes are so bad. Does that say 1 minute?
Yep.
1 minute. That is one of the chief reasons, is to just look at the effect and the incredible regressive nature of this tax on working families in Oregon who simply don't have $600 on average to hand over to the state of Oregon in an increase. The second one is the blank check. This hands the legislature. I'm a former legislator. I'm very sympathetic to, but it is, as legislative counsel, the legislature's own lawyers recently reported, it is a blank check to the Oregon legislature to spend on anything. And the third one is the effect on small businesses. And the reason that you see not the giant out-of-state corporations, but Emily Powell recently in the news saying, I don't know if Powell's can stay in business if this tax is passed. And that is a very progressive business. You're going to see Tillamook Farms and many, well, thousands and thousands of local, small, and medium-sized business talk about how this will affect your neighbors and families. Stop.
Thank you. At this point, we have an opportunity for rebuttals. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to argue against the points made by his opponent. Senator Dembrow, it's your turn, 3 minutes.
Thank you. I want to clarify that this measure is not a consumption tax on ordinary Oregonians. And the statement that passage of this measure will cost low-income Oregonians this amount of money is completely speculative. Remember, the way that this measure was designed, and it was very carefully designed, was designed to focus on those corporations that have the capacity to absorb these increases. Most of them are out-of-state corporations that they do their pricing not state by state, but nationally. Whether you're talking about groceries from large grocery chains or pharmaceuticals, they don't have individual state prices. They spread the cost all over the state. That's why, even though we have the lowest corporate taxes in our state, we're not paying lower costs than other states. This is how it works. The Legislative Revenue Office, I love them. They do great work. They would be the first ones to tell you we're much better at analyzing where we are than at predicting where we're going to go. And they do also include in their report, and I would encourage you to read the report. Don't cherry pick from it, but really read it. And you'll see that they also talk about this possibility that the costs will go actually out of state as opposed to in-state. It's what they call an upside risk. I want to say that the notion that this is a blank check to legislators, the measure calls for the focus to be on 3 areas. Education, healthcare, senior services. Okay, this is easy for me. These are my priorities. I've worked with the league on many of these over the years. I know these are yours as well. I believe that I can speak for all of my colleagues who are supporting this measure, that this will be our focus. And I'll actually quote to you from our Ways and Means Senate co-chair, Richard Devlin, when he says, if Measure 97 passes, we will follow the will of the people as we set parameters for the budgets moving forward. Under our authority, we will recommend a budget that dedicates the increased revenue from Measure 97 to education, healthcare, and senior services. We will have a very open, participatory process because there will be tough decisions to make on how to spend these dollars, but we will do it and you will be able to be involved in order to get the money where it needs to go. My fear is that there will be requests coming in for more corporate tax cuts to use this money for that. I pledge to combat that. I hope Ryan will do the same.
Thank you. Your turn.
Rebut away?
Go away. I mean, go for it.
Well, first, Senator Devlin, I served with Senator Devlin. I have every confidence or guess that as one half of that equation for the next 2 years, I'm a decent example of people come and go, and you can't bind, as legislative counsel says, you just can't bind future legislators and their spending priorities or governors. They can spend as they please. But the second and the most important point, I think, really is to spend a little time on the idea that we have the proponents, all economists aside, who can't understand this new tax, including the one they employed and paid $30,000. No one, including ITEP, the National Brookings Institute, because there's economic consensus at the national groups. No one can understand what we've just invented here and put on the ballot by non-economists. that we've invented this new way to pass the largest tax increase, not just Oregon, ever, and we found this magic source of $6.2 billion that is just going to descend on Oregonians and not affect the pocketbooks. Easy examples, utility. Those are state mandated. We have monopoly utilities. We pay, the PUC regulates. It's state statute, taxes are a pass-through. Those just go immediately onto your tax bill. Food, most states, other than a couple in the South, have exempted out with their consumption taxes the basic commodities of life: food, milk, gas, utilities, things that we all have to purchase. That's why this one is a sales tax on steroids, as their economist said. And as the governor said, of course, Oregonians aren't stupid. We know that we're going to have to pay this tax. There is no magic $6.2 billion, 30 to 40% revenue increase sitting out there that Oregon just stumbled upon and put on the ballot for your yes or no vote. The other thing that I would identify is the initiative is a really terrible way to do this. Huge, huge tax policy decisions put to you with a up or down yes, no vote. The proponents have already identified 3 areas where they said we made a mistake. During the February special session that we just, well, now, not just, it's probably like 6 or 7 months ago, they were quietly trying to take the software industry out because they understand, the proponents do and the authors of this bill, that they've included this growing sector of the economy and put them in, and they tried to quietly, and the legislature rightfully said no. They tried to quietly get out of a proposed initiative that hadn't even been qualified for the ballot, the software industry. And it shows you the oops, oops, oops. And that's why the Legislative Revenue Office has already said this will cost 37,000 Oregonians their jobs. And so the day after the election, I think that is, in a growing economy when we're trying to get back on our feet here in Oregon, to send pink slips to 37,000 Oregon families, which is the legislature's number, would be another real mistake to make as we're getting back on our feet.
Thank you. It's a big topic. In the next part of the debate, we will ask each speaker to answer questions about Measure 97. Ryan Deckert will have the first opportunity with 2 minutes to answer the first question, and then you will also have 2 minutes. And here's the first question. If Measure 97 passes, the legislature could make changes to it without the 3/5 majority vote in the House and Senate that is usually required for revenue measures. If Measure 97 fails, supporters could write a new version that might be successful. Are there changes to Measure 97 that you think it would, are there changes to Measure 97 that you think would make it a better measure? And kindly explain your answer and what kind of changes you might support.
Yeah, my change would be delete section 1 to 5, which is this initiative. I do not think going to a gross receipts 2.5, it would be the largest, obviously, consumption tax. Just look at the revenue generated by it, is the right approach. I think there is a way to absolutely derive more revenue. I do not think Oregon needs a 30 or 40% revenue increase. We just checked with the State Department of Education this morning. We're ranked, and this is 3 years old, so we'll be better, but we're ranked 31st in the nation in K through 12 funding. NEA, the National Education Association, in their latest update on their website right now has us at 23rd. That's not good enough. And certainly in post-secondary, we need to be better, and we need to invest more. But Oregon has a little ways to go. Passing a 6.2 where the own proponents tax on sales tax on steroids on Oregon working families is the wrong place to start this discussion. And it will cause more economic harm to our families and to our small businesses. And that's why you're going to see in the coming weeks so many of the faces that live in neighborhoods who own small businesses talk about them and how this affects their businesses. And that's why we're asking folks to vote no. And then pressure all parties to come up with better solutions, and through the legislature, through our democratically elected legislature. I know it's crazy that we might trust our representatives, but I think that's the approach.
Thank you. Senator Dembro.
Okay, thank you. Let me say a couple of things. Many of you will remember Measures 66 and 67 from a few years ago. That was a package that came out of the legislature. It was fiercely opposed by the business community, even though it came out of the legislature. And many of the exact arguments that are currently being used against Measure 97 were used against that measure. There have been many attempts over the years, as I mentioned, as Ryan mentioned, to come up with revenue reform here. And we have been unable to do that because, for a number of reasons, but a large reason is that the business community insisted that it include a sales tax, that it include a reduction in capital gains, and that it include a reduction in corporate taxes. And we knew that the voters would not go for that. That was clear to all of us. And so we look for, okay, so what is a strategy that could work, that would not hurt small business, Oregon small business, that would not hurt Oregonians, and that's where this measure came from. That's why I'm supporting it.
Thank you. Our second question, beginning with you. What do you expect the effect of Measure 97 to be on the prospects for more fundamental tax reform in Oregon, whether or not it passes?
That is a really good question. I think that there are many elements of our tax structure that need work, and I'm thinking immediately of the property tax. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to have a fairer system. I would certainly be a proponent of that. I think that, though, I would like to wait a few years before we do this. And, let's see how this measure works. And let's see what kinds of needs are there before we look at something, really very big. Now, that's not to say that we should not, as a regular basis, where we see inequities in the tax code, we work on them. Where we see people who are particularly hurt in their retirement, that we work on that. But in terms, I think that this will give us really some breathing space. That's why, as I mentioned before, this is going to be a real game changer. And it will take us a few years to hire those teachers, to hire the extra nurses, et cetera, and we'll immediately see the benefits of this. But over time, we will certainly see the benefits of this. Finally, I do want to say, the notion that we will have fewer jobs as a result of this, that's totally untrue. Every report says that this will not result in a loss of jobs. This will actually result in an increase in higher paid jobs, teachers, nurses, social workers, et cetera. That is, in other words, it's going to have a stimulative effect on our overall economy.
Thank you.
Here's
Go
what
ahead,
the
Ryan.
legislative revenue, whose reports to the legislature office, said just on the jobs front. 37,000 fewer jobs. You'll find it just right in that report, black and white, no question whether who's accurate here. You will increase 17,000 public sector. So you will have a net increase of 17,000 public employee jobs. That is true, and a reduction in private sector jobs. That nets out. So you will have a shrinking private sector, which obviously is the tax base for the public, and a growing public sector, but it nets out in a job loss, and that's just in the legislative revenue report on the economic effects. I would like to say one thing about Senator Dembro, who is one of the finest public champions, certainly in the legislature, for so many causes like post-secondary education. We sat out Measure 66 and 67 OBA. We're the second largest business group in the state of Oregon. We did not oppose it. And this is the first time in my life, I think my wife kids me, that this might be the first tax we might vote no on. I mean, we voted yes on every single one, and I certainly presided when I was Senate Finance Chair of a tax increase on corporate profits. The problem is, the proponents aren't going after that. They need to go after consumption because that's the only way you yield $6.2 billion, this game-changing number. And I do think you're right. The effects of this will be immediate and incredibly, incredibly unintended. And that's why you see so much distortion in the economy. And you see national publications starting to look at our tax structure in this initiative. Already, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times have already sent correspondents out here to look at this because no state and no citizens have ever tried something like this. Now, that's not a reason to vote no just because it's new. The reason to vote no is they are trying to get you to believe and defy all economic thinking, including their own. So there is no reputable economist that will not tell you that this will have an enormous impact on your lives and on your finances, disproportionately affecting those in the middle and at the bottom of the economic structure.
Beginning with Ryan Deckert. If 97 fails, what could we do to raise revenue?
Yeah, we absolutely would be at the table. We were there with Governor Kitzhaber. He tried to convene a table and actually do it legislatively. I would dispute some of the things that at least we put on the table that had to be part. But we were certainly open to ideas that would increase investment in key services like education and strengthen our safety net here in the state of Oregon. And that sometimes involves raising revenue. We'd also like to see the cost side on the table as well. We have, I think folks know, we have the third highest public employee cost in America. We do not have the third highest cost of living in the United States of America. And so I think you have to look at fair equations and look at both sides, like any family, any church, any business, any organization that is looking at their enterprise. They're looking at everything. They're looking at where are our costs and how do we root out costs and revenue. I know anyone would love the opportunity and get pretty excited and game-changing at the idea that in one fell swoop you're going to have a 30 or 40% revenue increase. And I think that's why this one is just so landmark, not just here in Oregon, but nationally, because what it's going to do to Oregon families and our small businesses. And we just refer you to all the economic reports that have been issued on this one.
Thank you. Senator Dembro.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. As you were able to glean from Brian's presentation earlier, if Measure 97 doesn't pass, we're looking at a cuts situation again. The Department of Administrative Services projects about a $1.3 billion shortfall just to keep the services that we currently have, to keep the people who are on the Oregon Health Plan on the Oregon Health Plan, to keep school days where they are now inadequately. There is no other plan on the table. And so if, I appreciate Ryan's willingness to come and try to solve it, but there is no solution to that. It's going to be, for me personally, it's going to be 2010 all over again, looking at budgets, where do I cut? Reductions in project independence, further reductions to schools. Higher ed, the argument will be, well, those students can pay their own way. We don't need to go there, and we should not go there. We have a good plan to get us the resources that we need and to really change the game in this state.
Thank you. Our next question, beginning with you, Senator Dembro. What, if any, impact would Measure 97 have on PERS, as it is predicted to increase the number of public employees? And would any of the $3 billion-ish that is designed to help education and seniors, et cetera, actually get rededicated to diminishing the PERS obligation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Well, as the number of teachers and nurses and social workers increases, They will be under a new PERS system that we've had in place for a while. They are not, the new employees are not the problem, nor are the older employees. They are not a problem at all. But they do carry with them some legacy costs. And I will say that we have tried to deal with PERS reform over the years. We have tackled it a couple of times. We have not been able to come up with something that will stand up in court. I voted for these, but it seems unlikely at this point that we will be able to. So our costs will go up. And so this measure will certainly not increase the costs, but they will help us to address those costs by not having to do further layoffs, et cetera.
Well, maybe in a nice moment, I agree with Senator Dimbro completely on that. He's right that the new added employees, that figure that I quoted of 17,000 new public sector would be in a new PERS regime. I do agree with them too that one of the impetuses for this measure, I'm only thinking for the proponents, I was not in that room when they came up with this, was we have a huge PERS bill coming because of the unique system that we have for our Tier 3 employees, and that's, at least in my own thinking, one of the reasons they must have put such a huge number out there is to pay for that. But I think Senator Dimbro answered that question 100% accurately and well.
Thank you. Does anyone know how many companies doing business in Oregon would be impacted? And another questioner has asked for specific examples beyond Fred Meyer and Powell's. You're first.
I am.
Yeah.
Well, every Oregon company is going to be impacted because we all buy gas. We all buy, that's why business consumption taxes capture business to business. That's why you see some states that have what would you call it, higher business taxes. Utah tends to be high consumption states. Washington, because they derive a great deal of the revenue through high consumption, and then that captures all the business to business, like the utility purchases, like Cisco for restaurants. And that's why this tax is not we used to have a saying when I chaired the Finance Committee in the Senate, like if we're gonna do $100 or $200 million tax increase, get a bigger hearing room. We couldn't do it in a hearing room this size because so many people would come forward and want to talk to you about that. When I first saw a $6.2 billion, I thought, you got to be kidding me. I mean, we were used to the 66 and 67. This is, what, 12 times that big debate we had that Senator Dimbro referenced. Maybe more. It was about a 400 or 500. So you do the math. Now 6.2 billion. So that big debate was $400 or $500 million tax increase. So this is going to affect when you're trying to draw $6.2 billion out of the Oregon economy, we're all paying it. And that's what the economic reports show, that small businesses paying it, we're all paying it, and Oregon consumers are paying it. Because if you wanted to pick on one of those large multinational, what are they going to do? They're going to do what they do with every consumption-based tax. They pass it on to consumers, and that's what the economists rightfully point out to us.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Great. Let me say just, in terms of the size of this, for us to fully fund our quality education model as recommended by the Nonpartisan Quality Education Commission, that's $2 billion by itself. That's how underfunded we are just looking at education. In terms of the businesses that would be affected by this, there are about 1,000. That's 1/4% of all the businesses doing business here who would be affected. Only those that are C corporations, and the great majority of the dollars, almost 85%, would come from companies like Walmart and Monsanto and just very large companies. Now, you will hear talk about Powell's, right, as an in-state business. You will hear talk about Chown Hardware, right, as an in-state place. In fact, there was just an interview with the chief operating officer of Chown the other day where he did actually candidly confess that they won't be affected because they're at $20 million. But he hopes someday to get to 25 and maybe even more. And so then if they double their sales, they'll still pay less than 1% increase. Powell's, the CEO of Powell's told her employees that they're just barely above the 25 million mark. So yes, they may be affected, but with a minuscule percentage increase. You're going to hear a lot in the advertisements here. Please be careful in critically listening to them.
Thank you. A pair of related questions. How much would the corporate income tax need to be raised to produce the $6 billion that Measure 97 is meant to produce? And related, over the last 25 years, why hasn't the business community reported to pay particularly low corporate taxes in our state? Why hasn't the business community come forward with a more productive and nuanced tax increase on businesses which the business community would support? And starting with you.
I think I'm going to give all my time to Ryan on that.
But how much would corporate income tax need to be raised to produce this number?
I really don't know, and perhaps Brian does, but you have seen how that number has gone down rather than gone up, so it's not clear to me. And the other problem, of course, is, as I referenced, you have a lot of corporations who have found ways to reduce their income, right? And you see that this is a national conversation, people sending their profits overseas or hiring accountants to bring their revenues down. So even though they're making a lot of money and frankly their chief executives are earning huge salaries, on paper they're making it seem as if they're not earning a lot of money. And so they really are kind of avoiding their taxes is the way I assess it. And we have to find a way to get them to step up.
Mr. Deckert, I can repeat any of this.
Oh, I have no clue how much you would have to, a lot, the corporate profits. I mean, as I started with, I do encourage folks, you probably have because this audience is very well educated on these issues, but read the measure because you won't find anything in there at all about profits. You'll find, you don't have to get very far to find sales, 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 sales. We have supported, to the general point of your question, we've supported, I know one in my tenure at OBA, we supported a corporate profit tax increase. It's on profits, not on sales. And then obviously in my tenure, prior life, we passed one as part of a multifaceted revenue bill. We passed a tax increase on corporate profits. We would absolutely come to the table, any table. When the Governor Kitzhaber invited us pre-97, I think we were the first ones there with ideas on how you could derive more revenue and do it in a way, I mean, Oregon probably has to have at some point some conversation about consumption, about introducing that in, because we have, like I said, the third highest income tax, and a lot of businesses, the majority are organized as S-corps. So they're paying that 9.9, third highest in the nation. By far, most are paying, if you drove out of here and circled 3 times and then went to Prineville, most companies you're going to see are S-corps. They're paying that 9.9%. We would absolutely sit at any table to think of how do you introduce consumption, but do it in a way that is not picking winners and losers, not as broad-based, is done through the legislature, not through the initiative, and then absolutely exempts out the basic commodities of life like food and medicine and milk and gas. And that's one of the real drawbacks of these take it or leave it initiatives that folks put on the ballot.
Thank you, and thank you both. We are out of time, and so I want to thank all of our participants. We thank our speakers. We thank our media partner, Metro East Community Media, for broadcasting and then rebroadcasting the forum. Thank you to AAUW and the YWCA for co-sponsoring, and to our timers. Please check your program and consult the League's website for replay dates and times, and that website is lwvpdx.org, and tell your friends. This is really important information for voting Oregonians. I hope you will all vote, but be informed voters. The League of Women Voters also produces a neutral voter's guide, which includes thorough coverage of all the state ballot measures and the local Multnomah County measures. The League's voters' guides are free, and they will be available in early October at the County Elections Office and at all of Multnomah County libraries. And online, lwvpdx.org. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. It's coming fast. Ballots will be mailed to voters around October 20th. Remember, we are a mail-in only state. We no longer have polling places. Your ballots must be delivered to an official drop-off site anywhere in Oregon by 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 8th. Postmarks don't count, so mail early. And the last day to register to vote is Tuesday, October 18th. We thank again our co-sponsors. Our next public meeting will be on October 10th, right here at the Multnomah County Building, this one in the evening at 7 p.m., covering local ballot measures. Please check our website again for details on speakers. I am Debbie Kay for the League of Women Voters of Portland. Thank you for watching our ballot measure forum. Please, again, be informed, and remember, your vote is very important. Thank you.